this part of our tutorial, we're just going to show you how to modify elements within an array. So this is going to be taking a value that already exists and changing it to a different value. We're going to do this by creating some arrays, and first we're going to access a specific element within each array, and then we're going to modify the values of these elements. So we're going to do what we call variable reassignment. Now we've seen a similar sort of thing when we were dealing with just variables. It's not so different. We're just going to take a variable within an array and then change that by accessing the specific index of that array. Now we've seen how to declare and initialize arrays of all kinds, and we've also seen how to access elements within those arrays. Now that's been particularly useful for accessing an element, storing it in a variable, and all we've done so far is we've printed it off. But we can also do a lot more with that. For example, if we had an array of integers, we could add elements together. If we had an array of strings, we could do the same. We could attach them all together, so on and so forth. So lots of things we can do, but one of the more important things we need to be able to do with arrays is reassign values. So with variables, it was easy. We have, for example, an integer I, and we're giving it the value 5 up here. Well, if we want to reassign it, we just go down here and we say now I equals 3. And we're good to go that we've reassigned our variable. We know I will now have the value of 3. However, with elements, it's a little trickier, but not that difficult. So if we were to create some arrays, then I'll show you how to not just access the elements, but access and modify them. So let's create some arrays here. We'll start off with booleans, and we'll include all of the types in here because accessing and modifying them is pretty much the same throughout all of these array types. So start off just with a simple boolean array. Again, we'll call it the true-false test, and we're going to give it just a few values. These are just going to be fairly small arrays because we don't need them to be big to get the point across. And what we're going to do, in fact, let's go through them one at a time. So now we've created our array. Again, we've seen this a few times. It's the true-false test, where there's a few values, and the test in this case is only 3 elements long, and so these are just test answers here. Now, what if the teacher hands out this test, then takes it back and realizes, oh no, the third answer should actually be false. I made a mistake. Well, I need to change that. So what we can do is, there are 2 ways. We can first create a Boolean variable, and let's call this answer 3. And we can say that it's the that's not what I wanted, the true-false test element at index 2. Because remember, it is index 0, 1, and 2. So that will give us the last one. So this is storing this value of true into answer 3. So we could do this and then say answer 3 is false instead. But this doesn't actually change the value within the array. This just changes the value of answer 3. So if we want to modify the true-false test of element 2, then first we'll get rid of this, and we'll also get rid of this. So this is calling the element at position, or rather index 2, and now we want to assign this a different value, so we want to call this false. Now this is perfectly allowed because this is just accessing a Boolean variable, which happens to be this one, and we're giving it a different value, false, down here. Just to prove that this is working, I'll print it out. In fact, I'll print out first the old, then the new values. So before the reassignment, I want to print out the true-false test variable at element 2, and I need to convert this to string. Cool. Alright, let's go ahead and run this. And let's see what kind of value we get printed out. Alright, we get true, because right now our element at position or index 2 is true. However, with this reassignment, now let's see what value we get. And after it runs, it's going to take a little while, and we get false now, because we've reassigned our value to be false. And that's basically how you reassign a value. You call the element that you want at the index you want, and you just give it a different value. Of course, providing that it's within this type. So if we try to give this 2, for example, an integer, it's going to complain. And it's going to give us this warning saying we cannot implicitly convert type integer to Boolean. Cool, so that's all there is to that. And let's just go through the other types just to hammer home the point. So we have a Boolean and now an integer array. We're going to call this command movement commands. And this is just going to take on some values. I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, -2. Cool, so we no longer want this here. We no longer want, in fact we'll keep that for now. And we want to change the value of movement commands. So we know that, for example, the movement command element at index 1 is going to be a 2. But we no longer want this robot or character to move forwards 2 spaces for our second command. Perhaps we want this character to move forward 5 spaces. So let's change movement commands at index 1. It's going to be element number 2. And we're going to change this to a 5. And we're just going to print out movement commands at element 1. Good stuff. So we'll stop this and we will run it again. And now it's saying that this isn't used, and that's right, that's fine. And we get 5 being printed out. So now this array looks, instead of 1, 2, 3, and -2, it now, after the assignment that we gave it, the reassignment we gave it down here, it would look like this: 1, 5, 3, -2. Okay? Now, we can do this for all of these. So we have doubles, and we can create an array of doubles, floats, characters, strings. We can go through all of them, but basically it's the same process. So regardless of whether it's in Android or iOS, this is how you reassign variables. So the key things to note here are that A, you're accessing an element that is within the array bounds. So if we try to access element 9, for example, we couldn't do that because there isn't an element 9. So let's see what happens when we try to do this. And in fact, we haven't actually given this a specific size, so this may be fine. If we were to do this, however, if we said new integer array of only 4 elements, then we might run into issues. So let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. There we go, and see, we get the app crashing because we've done something that we shouldn't. We can't really assign a value to an element of array that's outside of what we've declared it to be. So let's get rid of that. And we're going to get rid of this also, because remember, we no longer need it as long as we have these curly braces and some kind of assignments in there. So again, that's basically how you access the elements of an array. You call the array name, so true false test, for example, and then the index number, so this will be element 2, this will be element 1, element 3 is right here, and then you just give it a new value, so true. In this case it's already true, so we give it the value false. And that's variable assignment. It's going to be the same with booleans, integers, floats and doubles, characters and strings. Of course they're different types, So make sure that, for example, if you're reassigning a string array, let's take a look at that now. So let's just have, not sure exactly what happened there. So we're just going to undo that. So say yes, we have a string array. We'll just call this the same thing we had before, team roster. And we'll give it some values. So let's say the first value is Nate, second value is Colin, and I'm not going to bother filling in the third and the fourth that we had before. But let's say we want to reassign a value, so we go team roster of maybe the very first element. We can't do something like 5 because it's a string. We have to make sure that we're giving it another string. It could be blank, could be a blank string, that's fine, as long as it's a string. So as long as it's a variable of the type that is comprising this particular array. And that's just about all there is to reassigning elements within an array. So in this part of our arrays tutorial, I showed you how to access and modify certain elements within an array. We used Android to do it. So we started off by creating an array of booleans, integers, and strings. And within each, we accessed a different element and then reassign the value. So it's a two-step process. We first had to, well, after creating the array, we had to first access the element at the specified index, and then we modified it by reassigning that variable later on in the code. So by now you should be able to reassign variables, both freestanding variables and variables within an array, by accessing the element at the index of choice and then just reassigning the value further down in the code.